Okay, no problem.
Yeah, right. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. We are going to start. I would like to welcome you all here. Thank you for coming. My name is Mari Sanchez, and I'm the chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Sessions. That is part of Software Engineering Society. We are in the room 4. The session is 60 minutes long. It's divided into parts. I'll start with the 6 short presentations. Around 5 minutes long each one after the other. And of course, you can click on the emotion icon in the toolbar below the video to let us know your reactions at any moment. And in the second part of the session, we are going to discuss the paper, so you can post the questions in the chat, prefixing the name of the presenters your questions goes to. So let's begin. Uriel, the floor is yours. She is going to present how are diverse end users, human-centric issues discussed on GitHub. Please.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining my presentation today. I am Huriye Khalezadeh from the Human Eyes Lab at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. And today I'm going to talk about our work on identifying how diverse end-user human-centric issues are discussed on GitHub. Software systems aim to deliver efficient and satisfactory solutions in order to fulfill the expectations of their diverse end users. But there are lots of problems and issues that users might face because of the lack of understanding, addressing, and proper consideration of their specific characteristics, limitations, and abilities, such as their age, gender, physical and mental impairments, and so on. Developers' discussions are known to be a major factor in deciding how a system evolves, and they also include information beyond how a system works. Online software repositories such as GitHub attract a lot of discussions between developers on different topics, and they include information about the issues that they face during the software development process and how they react to these issues. In this slide, you can see an example of an issue on GitHub, which has a title, and it also has several comments. And this is actually related to an issue a user who's dyslexic has with the system, and the user needs some options such as the ability to increase font size, line height, and fonts. And this is actually followed by another developer comment saying that I'm not sure if I agree with this, which shows developers are not necessarily aware and agree with the issues that users face. To be able to understand how human-centric issues are currently discussed by developers in popular software repositories, in this work, we aim to identify and categorize the human-centric issues discussed by developers in GitHub repositories. We focused on a diverse range of end-user-based projects with different sizes and domains and types of users to increase the chance of identifying human-centric issues. We collected all the issue comments in 12 diverse projects and took a representative set of 1,691 issue comments for our manual analysis. We then completed the study in 2 phases with 2 analyzers in the first and then 3 analyzers in the second phase to come up with a taxonomy and to be able to label the human-centric issues in different categories. We categorize the human-centric issues into 8 categories: inclusiveness, privacy and security, compatibility, location and language, preference, satisfaction, emotional aspects, and accessibility. You can find the definition of these categories and examples of each of them in our paper. We finally found that a wide variety of human-centric issues are discussed in different GitHub repositories. Some of the human-centric issues are discussed more commonly, such as privacy and satisfaction and user preferences, whereas we found there is a very limited discussion of accessibility and emotional aspects. We also found that human-centric issues are different across different projects, and unlike our expectation, projects designed for challenged end users such as visually impaired and dyslexic users, and the ones with large-scale end users such as Firefox have very limited discussions of human-centric aspects, specifically in accessibility and inclusiveness categories. We provided some implications and recommendations for the other researchers and practitioners. We found that there is no structured way of reporting and addressing most human-centric issues on GitHub, and believe that there is a need for a more human-centric issue reporting and follow-up process and tools. In addition to this, we recommend that awareness of human-centric issues, training the developers and increasing their general awareness of human-centric issues can help incorporating and reporting human-centric issues more effectively. We are extending this work by looking at not only the developers' discussions, but also the issues that end users report through app review options on App Store and Google Play Store. And therefore, we've built a more comprehensive set of human-centric issues or categories. And we have also developed a smart tool to automatically detect such human-centric issues. And we're looking for practitioners' feedback on that. Thanks a lot for listening to my talk. Please reach out if you have any feedback, comments, and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Uriel, for your nice presentations. The next talk is a new approach to ours ensuring gender inclusive software engineering job advertisements. The presenter is Tangela. Please, go ahead.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this presentation. I'm Tanzila Kaniz. I work as a research fellow at the Monash University. I'm presenting our work of finding a new approach to help ensure gender-inclusive software engineering job advertisements. Before I start, we acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging of all the land we work and live on and their ancestral spirits with gratitude and respect. I acknowledge all the people of the Kulin nations, the traditional owners of the land on which I'm meeting with you from. It has been found that diverse teams perform better financially. However, software engineering workforce is heavily dominated by male professionals. One potential reason behind that could be the way job advertisements are designed. The existing word-based approaches to detect gender bias in job advertisements and to debias those are often not suitable in context of software engineering. To address this, we started looking for different ways. And we found GenderMag, which is a tool to identify gender-related biases in software. The tool uses 3 personas designed on 5 facets of problem solving for which people of different genders differ. The tool then uses these personas to perform some cognitive walkthrough on software interfaces and to detect any issues that are related to gender bias. We came up with an approach that is inspired by the GenderMag. Since job applications are not exactly a problem-solving activity, we first did a survey to identify the facets that influence job application behavior. We crafted 2 personas and applied cognitive walkthrough with these personas on some selected job advertisements. We had 44 responses of the surveys, and from which we identified 10 factors that we classified in 3 broad facets: software engineering views, career goals, and job application behavior. We then designed 2 personas based on those facets. We validated these factors. We presented these factor descriptions to some other participants and asked them whether they could relate to either of them or not. Participants said that on 5 of those factors, they could always relate to either Tim or Abby. On the rest of the 5 factors, they said sometimes some of them couldn't relate to either Tim or Abby. We performed a cognitive walkthrough with those personas that we have designed. We also presented the same job advertisement to some candidates for review. We found that on 2 of those job advertisements, Tim and Abby had differing views while we did the cognitive walkthrough. We compared the reasons we listed for this cognitive walkthrough, and we compared those with the reasons given by the participants while reviewing the same job advertisements. On those 2 job advertisements, our reasons matched more than 50% of the times. We believe that the facets that we have come up with will help hiring managers to understand the applicants of different genders and to design job advertisement accordingly to help both groups. The method is very easy to learn and it provides a systematic way to debias job advertisements. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Sandila. For the audience, let's put your questions, please. So the next talk is impact of animated objects on autistic and non-autistic users by Maria. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will now share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So I would like to present our joint work with Mona Anzalani and Sandra Untenbergen. So the focus is on impact of animated objects on autistic and non-autistic users. Well, animated objects are used quite often in UI, and not all animated objects are really bearing some information and are really needed. And we know that sometimes they are annoying and they have some impact, but how big the impact is and what is the difference when we speak about autistic and non-autistic users? Why autistic users? Well, many autistic users have a very sensitive, are very sensitive to visual overload in everyday life. And there are approximately 1% of overall population who might be on the autistic spectrum. So we might assume that exactly in this case, autistic people must be in focus when we speak about human-computer interaction studies, but unfortunately, this is not the case. And we would like to solve this issue and we set the research questions on the analysis of the user performance in general, and also in respect to autistic and non-autistic perception. So what are actually the core results? On this slide, you can see the results, but I assume that now you are also a bit distracted by these images because, well, images, if they are not related to the core of the topic, they might be distracting. So if I remove the distractors, I suppose it's now easier for you to see the actual information on the slide. And well, this was our initial perception that the animation, if it's unrelated, will be distracting, but for how much? As a result of our study, we were able to measure whether this is impact task duration. Yes, it does. Whether it is also have some, whether it has also some impact on the completion rate. Yes, it has. And even the number of errors during the task can increase. So if you look at the different types of tasks, several tasks are more affected than others. For example, reading a paragraph of text where we need to focus and then to answer particular questions on it, it has greater impact, more than 70%. Some tasks like editing an email is has lower impact. Some tasks like search tasks are even faster, but it has also additional influence on the task setting. That's why I don't think this is really a representative thing. So the impact exists, but what is the difference between autistic and non-autistic cohort? If you look at the task duration, autistic users are really impacted on a larger scale. So the task can take up to 40% longer in comparison to up to 19 in the case of non-autistic users. If you look at the number of errors, the situation is slightly different, but even when we see that autistic users might have lower impact on the number of errors, they have also greater likelihood of not completing the task at all when it's with animation. So that they just stop, or they try to cover their animated image by hand. So we see that the impact is really here. So it should be taken into account when we deal with UI. And actually, the impact might be even larger than we identified because of some limitations of our study. Because we had 26 non-autistics and 12 autistic participants, it would be much better also to have a larger study. Also, our non-autistic cohort, the majority of participants there didn't have English as their first language, where the majority of autistic cohorts were having English as their first language. Therefore, if we would have like more balanced cohort in this sense, we might have also like larger impact. Also, it would be very interesting to investigate not only autistic spectrum condition level 1, but also level 2, because then the impact might be even larger. Thank you for your attention. I hope this was 5 minutes.
Thank you, Maria. Great talk. And the next talk is another important topic about an empirical investigation on the challenges faced by women in the software industry, a case study by Bianca.
Hello, everyone. So this work I am Bianca Trinquian-Reich. I am a PhD candidate at Northern Arizona University. This work was done in collaboration with Ericsson in industry and with my two advisors, Marco and Nico. So women represent less than 24% of software engineers and experience many types of bias. Ericsson is a company that invests and believes in diversity and inclusion. So we worked together in a project to hear from women who are software developers about the challenges they face and the reasons that caused other women to leave, and their suggestions to increase numbers of women in the company. The goal of the project is to help companies to leverage their efforts to increase women, but based on employees' opinions. So we sent an online questionnaire that was answered by 94 women. We used mixed methods to analyze the data, and then demographic collected for segmented analysis of the challenges. Questions were all optional. The sample mirrors the company's numbers. Most of the respondents were from India, aging less than 35 years old, married, living with children, and having more than 10 years of experience in software industry. My God, the slides are going by their own. So we found 8 categories of challenges. Besides the work-life balance issues, both hostile and benevolent sexism were mentioned, as hostility in comments during technical discussions, but also being pampered, never given a hard, straight feedback, and being included only because are women, not because of the skills and capacity. Women mentioned also receiving no praise, and their results usually being evaluated as okay, never excellent. Women feel isolated and excluded from discussions. Failures are easily personalized, and this is bringing feelings of imposter syndrome. Well, not receiving the same salary as men in the same position, also having less opportunities to ladder as a career. Then when trying to achieve more things, women are called as ambitious in a negative way. So the need to be supervised while working an important issue, work harder to achieve the same as men, show competence all the time, and need to be 100% right all the time too. Maternal wall was mentioned as the way that some mothers are treated differently only because they have kids, receiving less work, and sometimes needing to step down to a lower position after returning from maternity leave. So I mark as with an asterisk those challenges that were also mentioned as reasons to leave. What about the actions to mitigate? So women also talked about strategies. So embrace equality was claimed by participants to mitigate challenges such as maternity wall, prove it again, sexism, lack of recognition, and glass ceiling. The company should train all managers in soft skills to have more empathy and avoid burnout in their teams, so they can also give respect and voice to women. By supporting career growth, women mentioned the company can also help women to break the glass ceiling, promote women to leadership, and help younger talents to feel confident to continue their career in the company. Hiring more women, which is related to a very nice paper that we just heard, can help to mitigate the lack of peer parity. Women's suggestion change in the job opportunities and also recruitment process, invest in marketing, create more part-time positions, be more transparent. Promote the feeling of imposter syndrome can be mitigated by empowerment and also by support groups, by interaction between women from different departments. Sometimes one department has not a lot of women, but interacting between departments can help. Empowerment can also be fostered by recognition, sharing the success stories of Ericsson women and rewarding the achievements. So, we see that as a discussion, some problems can surpass the organization, can be beyond the organization gates, and are related to local culture and employees and managers. There are problems that bump into the society, which many times contributes to this to this cultural legacy. However, there are also space for improvement in the organization. And this is shown as they asked us to help. Ericsson is committed to implementing the suggested challenges and to mitigate those. While attaining the promotion to leadership is not easy, well, breaking the glass ceiling can be even harder. So serving in a high position often lack the support of authority to accomplish the goals. Women mentioned that having more women to inspire, encourage, and also mentor them can help to address the glass ceiling. Some topics should be emphasized in trainings, such as speaking up on behalf of women who are being disrespected in meetings. Some suggestions are already in place. Ericsson plans to raise awareness about those that maybe women are not aware of it. So they are complaining and asking for it. And also additional actions that can complement the suggestions to mitigate the challenges. Sexism is considered completely unacceptable behavior to Ericsson. So the managers are already starting to have collective meetings with the team to spread this message and make sure everyone understands. Well, we understand that there is a long work ahead. We understand that even in a company that has a commitment to diversity and inclusion, women are still perceiving the challenges and are calling for changes. So there is a lot of long work ahead for the company, for the software industry, for us as society to create a more diverse and inclusive environment. We hope that our results will enlighten more actions toward reducing the perceived challenges and increasing awareness about the hurdles imposed to women that negatively influence the diversity in the software industry. Thank you very much to everyone who is now watching the presentation and also to our participants who trusted us the challenge of making their voices being heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Bianca, for raising the voices of other women. And next, we have another interesting talk is about detecting interpersonal conflict issues and code reviews by Sophie. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Sophie from Carnegie Mellon University. I'm presenting our paper, Detecting Interpersonal Conflict in Issues and Code Review, Cross-Pollinating Open and Closed Source Approaches. As a social-technical activity, software development involves communications that are not always healthy. One study found that free and liberal open source software communities are such a rich source of insulting or profane speech data. The negative communication experience can be discouraging, especially to marginalized groups such as women or newcomers. Automatic detection can help with prevention and mitigation. For example, Stack Overflow uses a bot to flag unwelcoming comments, and also there are some tools by Google. But off-the-shelf tools don't always work well in software engineering. Some of the reasons include technical jargon, word contractions, emoticons, URLs, or code snippets. Another example is that in real life, kill and execute might mean something similar, but it's not the case in software engineering. Therefore, kill the process is an ordinary command and it's not coming from Queen of Hearts. There are several tools developed independently in software engineering. For example, sentiment analysis, anger detector, toxicity detector, and pushback detector. Our work expands on the paper by Raman and colleagues and the one by Eggleman and colleagues. We chose these two papers because these two works were the most recent when we started the study, and they are different along several axes. One is across context. Raman's paper works in the context of open source, whereas Eggleman's paper situates in corporate settings. And also across types of communication. Raman's work focuses on issue discussions, whereas Eggleman's work focuses on code review discussions. And also across concepts. Raman's paper centers around the concept of toxicity, which is defined as a rude, disrespectful, or unreasonable comment. And Eggleman's paper uses the concept of pushback, which is defined as the perception of unnecessary interpersonal conflict in a code review, while a reviewer is blocking a change request. So basically a delay in code review. And also across methods. Raman uses the text-based features, whereas Eggleman uses the log-based features. So we have many research questions. I'm just highlighting some of them. Can we cross-apply these methods? How much can the toxicity detector classify pushback? And can these tools work across contexts? And finally, can we combine them? The short answer is yes to some of them. And for the rest of the research questions and more details, please read our paper. So we encountered several challenges along the way. For example, we need to construct new data sets to bridge the two prior works. And also we need to refine the features. For example, we can't replicate all features from Google, and we have to use approximations. So now I'm going to present some result highlights. When we apply these two works across types of communications, we retrain the text-based classifier for issues on code reviews. Both are in open source. And we see a lower performance on the code review dataset. We have some speculations, so please read our paper to find out. Also, we apply them across contexts. So we retrain the log-based classifier for corporate code review on open source code review. And again, we see a lower performance. It may be because we can't replicate all features and we need to use some approximations. We then try to apply them across methods. We apply both the text and the log-based classifiers to detect pushback in corporate code review. We found that the text-based classifier works better. This implies that although pushback was initially defined as a delay in code review, there's more nuance in the language. We have many open questions left, such as how to improve the classifiers, how to expand the datasets, which are now quite small, and how can we perform prevention. So in summary, in this work, we cross-pollinated the two prior works across several axes. We overcame some challenges along the way, including datasets and features. I highlighted some of the results here, and please read our paper for more. And these results have many implications on future research directions and open questions. For more information, you can scan this QR code for the full presentation or read our paper. Thanks.
Thank you, Sophie. Great talk. And finally, we have the next talk about perceptions of the state of DNA and DNA initiative in the ASF by Igor, I think.
Okay, I'll start sharing.
Oh, sorry, Mariam.
Okay. No problem. Okay. Let's see. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Mariam.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so my name is Miriam. I'm a PhD student at Oregon State University, and I'll be presenting our paper entitled Perception of the State of DNI and DNI Initiative at the ASF. So in this paper, we tackle two research questions. So first, we look into how do contributors with different backgrounds perceive the state of DNI, the state of diversity and inclusion in their OSS community. And to do this, we segmented our analysis using 6 different background attributes. Example, gender, education, seniority at ASF, how many years of experience they have at ASF, compensation, etc. And the second RQ is how do contributors perceive DNI initiatives in their OSS communities? So our data collection consisted of surveys. We received 600 plus responses from ASF contributors, and then we did follow-up interviews, 11 of those, to get a deeper understanding. For the analysis, we used mixed methods. So we used both ordinal logistic regression and open coding to understand and answer our 2 RQs. Now onto a summary of RQ1. So the state of DNI, or the perception of the state of DNI, and here we summarize the findings where the differences between background attributes were statistically significant. So first, looking into role stereotyping, while women have been associated with the role stereotype of being a parental figure and a caregiver, these gender stereotypes were not a factor for respondents who identified as gender minority. However, they were for senior contributors, and these are contributors that have been at ASF for 3 or plus years. When we look at the feeling of being patronized, this feeling was a factor for gender minority and those who are not confident in English. Now on to contributors' perception on barriers to contribute. So here, again, gender was a factor in the perception of barriers that keep those in the minority gender from contributing to a project. And also, both gender and the lack of English proficiency were factors in the perception of barriers in building a solid network of peers within their community. The lack of English proficiency was also a factor with barriers following technical discussion when these discussions include a lot of jargon. On the feeling of being represented, or here the feeling of being not represented, for example, in decision making, the lack of English proficiency was associated with this feeling. And on the perception of the PMC, the Project Management Committee, and whether or not the PMC is diverse and representative of contributors, compensation was associated with a feeling of a non-diverse PMC. And compensation in terms of people who were being paid associated, found that the PMC was not diverse enough in their community. Now, onto the extent of DNI issues. Here, the contributors' perception of the DNI issues was a mixed bag, where some attested to its presence, while others felt that the DNI issues were either non-existent or politicized. And some of them were just in the middle and preferred to just stay out of the heated discussion. For RQ2, we looked at these initiatives. So these different open source organizations have started initiatives and projects and working groups to address D&I issues, and we wanted to understand contributors' feedback on these. So one of the most used initiatives is the Code of Conduct. In being aware of the COC, of the Code of Conduct, there were no significant differences between segments across the different demographic attributes. This could be explained by the fact that the Code of Conduct have been used for a long time now and is widely adopted. However, when we looked at the feeling of being empowered by the Code of Conduct, not being compensated and being more of a volunteer contributor was a significant factor. Now, more generally into the perception of the different D&I initiatives at the ASF, contributors also had different opinions. Some of them found that the community is making efforts to improve D&I, and others provided some critiques and ways to improve. So some of these critiques were that the initiative is not attending to all D&I issues, and here they suggested considering other diversity attributes other than gender, and also being more inclusive of the contributors that are already in the community. Another critique was that the initiatives was creating polarization, and this is when some people are feeling that there's pushback for the D&I initiatives, while others feel that the D&I initiative is not giving the importance it should be giving. Now, one topic that we could talk about is intersectionality, especially that when we look at like gender minority who maybe are also not confident in English, and we're thinking, okay, so how's their feeling of being patronized exacerbated by that? So that could be a discussion topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marianne. I'm totally agree with you with the topic that you pointed out now. So we are going to start, great talk, Marianne, and we are going to start with the Q&A session and discuss some details about the papers. I'll start with the questions on the chat. And thank you, Anita, for your questions. The first one is for Huriel. And Anita says, great and very important topic. I was wondering that of the 8 categories discussed, privacy and security and compatibility seem more technological focused than the others. Could you give perhaps some examples of where compatibility was a human factor? Thank you, Anita.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. I think that's a really good question, and we've explained that, we've discussed that in the discussion section of the paper. Yes, they are technical. Privacy, security, and compatibility are technical, but how we looked into these issues in this paper was from a human-centric point of view, from the point of view of the end users of the system. And sometimes the tool doesn't have compatibility issues or privacy issues, but then it is not compatible based on the user's situation or like socioeconomic status and so on. One of the examples that we saw a lot was that some of the users don't have access to the latest phone or like operating systems, and the tool was working fine for everyone, but then it was just working with the latest versions of like iPhones or Android apps, but that wasn't usable for someone who was like marginalized or was using the app from a rural location and so on. And in terms of privacy, privacy is also a concern for some users, but not for some other users. One of the examples we saw a lot was in COVID-19 apps, and the fact that they were private, some of them were not even tracking the location of the users, but some users were very suspicious and were not happy to use the app. So we just considered those specific users who have different privacy concerns from other users. So we just looked into it from the point of view of the end users and not from the technical perspective.
Could I follow up on that, Mary? Is this a discussion?
Yes, please, go ahead.
All right, great work. Actually, it's pretty interesting. I had not thought about this, but at OSU, Oregon State University, we have this thing called Inclusive Mag, and Gender Mag is one of the siblings that we have been talking about a lot and many people know. But one of the variants we are trying out is SES Mag, Socioeconomic Status or Socioeconomic Situation Mag. And actually two of the facets there are, one of them is access to reliable technology, which we were thinking more like what we found was like good internet, a fast computer. But what you just said about a old OS totally makes sense. And the other one was authority, like, privacy, not privacy, but how they perceive authority figures, right? This is where, like, police, like, for example, lower socioeconomic status folks, especially in the Black community, have not suspicions, but they don't look at authority figure like police very nicely, given how much bias there is in the US. This is based on US data. So this is another case where in technology, when data is being collected, people are suspicious about how it's going to be collected. So these two facets match exactly with what the examples you gave. So maybe you should look it up. I'll send you private.
Sure,
yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Very nice work. Good job.
Yes, so a great job. And I'm curious as well about the safety, because security is not the same as safety. You approach that as well?
So you mean why we've put privacy and security into one category? Is that...
Yes, but safety is something that is not the same as security, but I'm not sure if you are putting into that.
So the reason we put some of these categories together, location and language was the other one, and privacy and security was the one that we put together, was that we didn't have many examples for security, for example. We just found something that was the most relevant and we just grouped them together. But in the extended work that I talked about, we came up with like subcategories. So in case something's not exactly relevant, we just put them in different like categories and then subcategories. But this is just the preliminary work on the taxonomy, and we have a like more comprehensive version of it now, which has like different categories and subcategories. But I totally agree with your point.
Thank you so much. Anita, I'm not sure if you want to talk with Maria and discuss the comment.
Okay. I mean, you can ask other people other questions. I just writing questions out. So
no, but it's fine. Your question, your comment is nice to hear from you.
Cool. So
Maria.
So Maria, awesome job. I think we need more work on neurodiversity, and I'm so happy to see people are doing that. So this is great. I have more a comment than a question, really. But I can ask you more questions about the method, because it's really interesting how you got autistic kids and at what end of the spectrum your participants were. But before that, what I have written out there is, as I said before, we have this inclusive MAG method, which is basically a method which is based on cognitive walkthrough that allows you to find problems or inclusivity bugs in your system. We haven't done that, but one of the class instances at OSU, the student team tried to create a autism MAG, and one of the things they found as a facet was concentration, right? So those who have lower concentration find it really hard to finish the work, and we were looking at actually how much text they were reading. But your work is kind of also interesting. So things that animated is also causing them to lose concentration, right? So we were thinking gobs of text is not good. You need to break it up, maybe put some figures and pictures. But I think your work says that, hey, we should not do animation because that might even affect. So I'll ask the question if nobody else says anything. How did you?
No, there are other questions. Thank you, Anita.
So how did you, what was the spectrum and where did your participants fit in, and how would you actually be able to do a controlled study if there are different spectrum levels, right?
Well, originally we wanted to have 2 levels, 1 and 2, but we were unable to find any participant of level 2 because, well, the project started as a master thesis with very limited time. Then it was also growing after the thesis finished with additional analysis and so on, but we were already unable to collect more data. Therefore, it would be really good to have a bigger project, potentially also like really large project with not only conducted in Australia, but more broadly, and maybe also using not only English, but also other languages, because then we might also collect richer data. So it would be really great to have like international project on this topic. And what might be also important about what we did, from what I have seen in literature, the majority of the work is focused on autistic kids, really on children. Because nowadays many diagnoses, they are for children, but we focused on adults. And these might be also like very, very different to what other people did previously.
No, you're right. When I was talking, I just said children, right? Because most of the autism work that I have, just used that smart area have been on children. So yeah, that's important. Yeah, I think it's a really important work because we just forget about disabilities of other kinds. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe we should ask somebody else's question.
Okay. Of course. Maybe Bianca, you can raise some questions for Tandila.
Questions in the chat to comment some of the questions. So Anita and Sophie had shared the same question about what is the intersection of the challenges faced by women in the software industry and women in open source. So one of the challenges that we didn't find in the a recent systematic mapping in women participation in open source was the maternal wall. Although it could be happening, it was not found from the literature. So maternal wall is like when you receive less work because you are a mom. So, and also when you are stepped down from a role because you are a mom. So it was not mentioned like that with this, but by the literature, but it could be happening. So like it was mentioned, so women can receive less work because they are women. But if they are receiving less work also because they are mom, can also configure a maternal wall, So it was not being mentioned by the literature in open source, but it could be easily being happening. What was really not mentioned by the literature was being like stepped down a role. So they clearly mentioned that after returning from maternity leave, and returning from maternity leave is something that usually happens in the software industry, in the industry environment. So returning from maternity leave caused some women to need to step down to a lower role. So this is probably not something that we can observe in open source because it's a different ecosystem and structure. But it could also happen like losing rights or losing commits or not being a maintainer anymore because you were away and took a break for your maternity leave. Yeah.
I have something to add to the maternal wall and open source. Emerson had a paper in 2019 where he investigated whether there's this maternal wall bias. He was counting the number of profile pictures by men, women, whether they put children in the picture. Well, they didn't observe the difference between like the numbers. But I think maybe there's another way to model it, or maybe because on open source it's like more flexible. You can work on the open source anytime, and people might not be aware of like you're having a children. It's not as obvious as in like a workspace. So maybe yeah, maternal wall may be something that's like less of a threat in open source.
Maybe it's not being reported so like explicitly, but it's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's also, yeah, it's hard to detect or hard to pin down if it's because I'm a mother.
Mhm.
I have a follow-up question for Bianca.
Yes.
So if I'm kind of getting what Tanjila and Tanjila is saying, not Sophie talked about the maternal wall, it's like, okay, so some women were given less work maybe, or some were given more work to show that they have to prove themselves. And then there's maternal wall. Do you see any difference between those who are moms, the maternal wall versus just being women? Was there any kind of comparison between these two characteristics?
Not quantitatively, but in terms of qualitatively reporting, we could see like women saying, I receive less work. And why? So this is what I was putting it in the chat. Why do you receive less work? Is that because they feel you are not able to do? Is that because you need to prove it again because you're a woman? But sometimes they mention that they receive less work because they are a man. And only because of that, I have made this distinction between the categories of challenges, because receiving less work could be also a benevolent sexism. You receive less work because you cannot do, poor you, I'm sorry, and then you receive less work. So could be receiving less work per se could fit in 3 different categories, but the reasons behind that made me categorize it differently. But yes, they mentioned it differently.
And this less work tied with career, rising career movements?
The glass ceiling was another thing. The glass ceiling was not that I'm receiving less work. It was that I'm receiving less opportunities to grow, which is kind of different than receiving less things to do, So it was like I cannot raise, or even when I raise, it's hard for me because I don't have any support. It's too hard for me. I don't have authority. So it's different than receiving the work to do. It's like receiving opportunities to raise.
Right.
Did I explain?
I'm wondering, if I get less work to do I get promoted less then? Or
maybe. Yeah.
But anyways, fantastic work. Okay. Yeah.
Thanks.
But
Yes,
I'm not a
it's a
co-author
great
to the
work.
paper. Yeah, I'm not a co-author to the paper, so I want to just say that this paper got the best paper award for the CIS.
Yes,
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Well deserved. So maybe if Sophie wants to comment, do some additional comment.
Anita's question. I saw, Anita had a question I didn't answer. So Anita said like some of the concerns with PR comments are things like being abrupt, giving nitpicks, or talking down. Really hard to detect these sentiments. So I have a short chase paper this year about like some of the linguistic cues that we could use, like that's like built specifically tailored to software engineering, because we manually coded some PR comments, and we found they use nitpick a lot. So they just put nit and then some nitpick, and we understand that as it could be like a negative politeness strategies, like could you do something that kind of nitpick. So it is really hard, because by saying nitpick, it's degrading, like it's trying to eliminating some of the burdens on the contributor. So it is really hard to say whether that's really causing the stress, because I say, oh, it's like, could you change this? I'm saying it's already a nitpick, you can ignore or something. So currently, so all those like off-the-shelf tools can't really capture this nuance. We have figured out some of the linguistic cues, but we don't have that in our current classifiers yet. Maybe in the future we'll add some like software engineering specific terms in our classifier to tune to like the software engineering conversation. I don't know if that makes sense, like about the nitpick part.
Yeah, because there's this whole thing of drive-by commenting, right? So it's not that, you can be nice and say nit, or I can just dump a whole bunch of nitpicks, which is like really small things, and just like poke at you, right? And these things, I don't remember which paper it was, but I think somewhere I read that this is, again, not my core area, that women got a lot more drive-by comments, that people would come and get a lot of comments, and they're just like fixing things. I think it was in open source context. And that is just like drives them down. So there is toxic comments, but there's also where lots of people just jump in and give comments who are not even in the team. So those kind of stuff. And another thing is like just being abrupt and you should do this versus, saying it nicely, which might not be biased, but it might come across as rude. So rudeness versus toxic behavior, right? It's very different. Like kill versus kill, that's again something. But even in software engineering vocabulary, human nuanced putting down can be very hard to find with these automated techniques. So I'm really curious, like what we could do about it. It's a really, really hard problem, but I think it's important.
Yeah,
Because
I
people are
definitely
going from real toxic to very nuanced way of putting down people, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we also need like a more labeled data. That right now our data set is very small, only like hundreds of conversations, and we need larger data set to capture all those like nuance, like human already can be able to identify, and then we can train a classifier, and also put them into code of conduct, like Igor suggested. Like once we find some like patterns, common patterns, we can suggest people try to avoid these patterns.
Okay, it's very, very nice. Please go ahead, Maria.
Can I add also one point to what was presented and discussed by Bianca regarding these differences in the work allocation. So it might be also that the difference is not in the amount of work, but in the type of work, not in the workload itself, but in the type of the workload. There was really either today or yesterday a paper that I saw in some magazine, but this was not academic paper, this was journalist paper about the situation in Australia, that in many cases women get different types of tasks, like the tasks that are less rewarding, that less contributing to promotion. And
Yes.
I'm not sure what actually the participants meant by this less tasks, because tasks are different. And this is true both for academia and industry. Like in academia, a lot of teaching workload is less beneficial for your promotion, because for your promotion, you need to have time for research and so on. And these kind of questions might be also on the same level, but with different type of tasks in industry, because industry also have a benchmark for promotion, and maybe this is about this kind of difference.
Yes.
I'm not sure.
We noted that there were participants who mentioned receiving needing to be supervised during important tasks, and also not receiving such important tasks. So those were categorized into prove it again, but also can be, like Anita said and you said, can be connected to the glass ceiling, so receiving less work, less opportunities. But yeah, completely agree with you.
Okay, we 3 minutes left, so maybe one round. We can do one round about final thoughts about each one of the papers. Maybe Marianne, you can add something, a final thought.
Oh, sorry. Did you say Miriam? Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm like reading through, I'm scrolling through the papers that I've listened to right now, and like kind of, and it's kind of nice to see how they link all together in a way. And it's all about like some of it is open source and some of it is more corporate, but it's also all about So like the part where it's like toxicity and like Bianca that has looked more at the corporate aspect of things. I'm kind of trying to look around and link things together. I don't have a specific question right now, but I've been thinking about the toxicity aspect that Sophie's looked at, and I'm wondering, like, were there projects in open source that you looked at where you can see a big difference in? Because I'm thinking maybe projects that have more contributors in them in open source might be a source of more like communication and more potential toxicity versus smaller, more niche projects. So was that something that you've seen or you've experienced?
Oh, we didn't look at the